Story 18. What the Early Explorers Saw. BIRRARUNG by Jim Poulter. Although all Australians now know that our continent was not terra nullius, we are still influenced by the assumptions embedded in our written history. Early explorers frequently marvelled at the ordered beauty of the landscape before them, but automatically assumed it was a pristine natural environment. For instance, way back in 1642, Abel Tasman described the vista of Tasmania's south coast near present-day Hobart as
pretty generally covered with trees standing so far apart that they allow a passage everywhere, unhindered by dense shrubbery or underwood.
This spacing between trees and the absence of undergrowth is not what we see today. When colonisation began, the regular firing of the environment by Aboriginal people was prevented. Forest areas and dense undergrowth, therefore, inexorably grew back to provide fuel for our regular and devastating bushfires. Abel Tasman's observations were later echoed by James Cook in April 1770, who noted,
"The woods are free from underwood of any kind, and the trees are at such a distance from one another that the whole country might be cultivated without being obliged to cut down a single tree."
When the first fleet finally arrived in 1788, Captain Watkin Tench noted that
"The face of the country is such as to promote success whenever it shall be cultivated, the trees being at a considerable distance from each other, and the intermediate space filled, not with underwood, but a thick, rich grass growing in the utmost luxuriancy."
Many other settlers and explorers similarly commented that
"In parts it resembles the park of a country seat in England, the trees standing in picturesque groups to ornament the landscape."
When the colony in Tasmania was established in 1803, settlers moving into the hinterland often recounted how they emerged from forest areas into lightly treed pastures of great beauty. They gave these places names like Eden, Paradise, and Promised Land, presuming it was a pristine environment put there by God. Similarly, when John Batman first arrived in Port Phillip in May 1835, he incredulously noted,
"As rich land as I ever saw with scarce a tree upon it, the grass above our ankles. Most of the high hills were covered with grass to the summit, and not a tree. The whole appeared like land laid out in farms for some 100 years back, and every tree transplanted. I was never so astonished in my life."
Notice how there is a pattern in the observations: grassy hilltops, picturesque copses, and open, sparsely treed areas. Because we have been so indoctrinated with the idea of terra nullius, these words usually go straight through to the keeper. However, Aboriginal oral history can often help provide a deeper understanding. For instance, as once was explained to me, the grassy hilltops were grass seed or grain farms. The local clan would routinely clear the hilltops of trees, then contour ploughed or ringed them with stone terraces. This meant that the rain did not readily run off, thereby helping the growth and continual self-sowing of grain grasses. Kangaroos and emus would not go up to the hilltops because there was no shade or protection there. When ripe in summer, grain was harvested from the hilltop farms, threshed and stored in kangaroo skin bags for later use. These bags would often weigh several kilograms. Explorers like Charles Sturt discovered storage wells and hollow trees containing large leather bags of seeds. When the grain was later required, particularly at times of large inter-clan gatherings, the grain seeds were ground into flour to make damper. The more thickly wooded areas, noted by Tasman, Cook, Batman, and many others, varied in size. This might be from 100 metres to a couple of kilometres in width, and these copses were always surrounded by a curtilage of open ground. As possums do not like crossing open ground, these separated copses were protected habitats that were effectively possum farms. The more open areas, where the trees were a regular 25 to 50 metres apart, were kangaroo and emu farms. The trees provided sufficient shelter for early morning and late afternoon grazing, and also provided a strategic stalking distance for Aboriginal hunters. But there were more than just possum farms and kangaroo farms. Like on the hilltops, flatter areas would be cleared of all trees to form grain farms and murnong farms. Grasses preferred by kangaroos would then be encouraged adjacent to the grain farms, so as to form grazing borders for the kangaroos. Gullies and creek valleys were also subject to annual firing, so as to promote the growth of murnong, the native yam. Each spring, these murnong farms would be a blaze of yellow with the flowering of the yam daisy. The cultivation and harvesting techniques employed by the women ensured the constant regeneration and proliferation of the yams in designated areas. To ensure creeks did not run dry during the summer, dams and chains of ponds would be created. When required, yabbies, fish and mussels would be carried in coolamans to stock the ponds. These protected breeding grounds then became a series of yabby and mussel farms up the creek valley, and were often flanked by murnong farms. About Jim. Jim Poulter is a local historian with an interest in Indigenous history.